There is a specific kind of silence that settles over a man when he stops trying to prove himself to people who'd have already decided who he is. My family called me the useless one for 23 years, and then, one morning, their entire world collapsed, when I was the only person on Earth who could save it. This is that story. My name is Daniel Mercer, and in the Mercer family, that didn't mean much. There were 4 of us kids. My older brother Garrett, the golden one, ran track in college, natural salesman, loud laugh, firm handshake. My sister Claire, sharp, ambitious, the one my parents pointed to at dinner parties. And then my younger brother Kyle, funny, charming, everybody's favorite. And then there was me. I wasn't loud. I wasn't the athlete. I didn't have a pitch-perfect comeback at every family gathering. I was the one who stayed quiet, read books in the corner, spent hours at the computer, took things apart to see how they worked. My dad had a phrase he used more than my actual name. Daniel, stop daydreaming and do something useful. That was it. That was our entire relationship summarized in one sentence. Repeated at the dinner table, at holidays, at my college graduation, and even once, I kid you not, at my grandmother's funeral. While Garrett was being groomed to run my father's construction supply business, a mid-sized company my grandfather had built from nothing, I was handed the filing room, literally. They gave me a room full of paper invoices and told me to make myself useful, so I did. What nobody noticed, what nobody cared to notice, was that while I was in that filing room, I taught myself bookkeeping, then accounting software, then tax code, then business law, contract structures, vendor negotiations, and financial modeling. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed to understand the thing my family had dismissed me from inheriting. I built spreadsheet systems in that filing room that would have saved them tens of thousands of dollars. I identified a vendor contract that was quietly bleeding the company by thousands a month. I wrote up a 3-page memo and left it on my father's desk. He used it as a coaster. I remember Garrett laughing at Christmas dinner one year. I'd had a few drinks, the way Garrett always did before he said the quiet part loud. You know what Dad calls Daniel's little projects? The hobby hour, like a kindergartner's finger paintings. The table laughed, even my mom. That soft, apologetic laugh that still chose sides. I smiled. I always smiled. Because what nobody understood is that a man who is consistently underestimated has one massive, invisible advantage. Nobody's watching him, or I kept working quietly, relentlessly. Outside of family hours, I had started freelancing, financial consulting for small businesses. By the time I was 29, I had 6 steady clients. By 31, I had 16. I'd built a quiet, unglamorous, deeply profitable consulting practice that nobody in my family knew existed. They thought I was still doing some computer stuff. Garrett had been promoted to vice president of operations by my father. Claire had married a real estate developer and moved to Phoenix. Kyle had just been given a junior partnership in the business. I was still doing some computer stuff, and I had stopped trying to explain otherwise, because here is what I had learned in 31 years of being the invisible son. You don't argue your worth, you demonstrate it quietly on your timeline, not theirs. I just didn't know how soon that timeline would arrive. The call came on a Tuesday in October. It was my mother, which was unusual because my mother almost never called me directly. News in the Mercer family traveled through Garrett, who'd relay it down the hierarchy like a general briefing his lieutenants, and I was somewhere far below the chain of command. Her voice was different, thin, like she was holding it together with 2 fingers. Daniel, your father needs to talk to you. Something is happening with the business. Something happening. What had happened was this Garrett, brilliant, golden VP of operations. Garrett had spent 18 months negotiating a massive expansion deal with a regional developer, new contracts, new warehouses, new payroll. He'd convinced my father to take out a $0.1 million loan against the business to fund the scaling. The developer had gone bankrupt. The contracts dissolved. The new warehouses sat half-stocked. The payroll commitments remained. The debt remained. and in the process of rushing the expansion, Garrett had, accidentally he swore, accidentally, co-mingled a personal account with a business expense account in a way that a sharp auditor could interpret as financial misconduct. The bank was circling, a creditor had filed, and someone had flagged the account irregularity to the state comptroller's office, the Mercer family construction supply business. My grandfather's legacy was approximately 90 days from collapse, and potentially 2 degrees from a fraud investigation. I found all of this out in a single phone call, not from my father, from my mother, in fragments. When I arrived at the family home that weekend, the living room felt like a hospital waiting room. My father sat at the head of the table, looking older than I had ever seen him. Garrett sat next to him, jaw tight, papers spread everywhere. Kyle was stressed, eating chips in the corner, and the moment I walked in, the room contracted. My father looked up and said, genuinely, with no self-awareness whatsoever, "Is Claire coming? We need people here who can actually help." I sat down anyway. For 3 hours I listened. I watched Garrett explain the situation using the wrong terminology, confusing gross liability with net exposure. I watched my father nod along as if understanding. I watched them discuss hiring a crisis PR firm for an accounting problem because someone had Googled business collapse help, and that was the first result. I asked one question, just one. Have you pulled the full vendor contract archive from the last 4 years? Garrett looked at me like I'd asked for the weather on Mars. Daniel, this isn't a filing problem. This is a financial crisis. I know what it is, I said, quietly. Have you pulled the contracts? He hadn't, and nobody had. I went home that night. I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more clarifying. This was the moment, not the moment for revenge, not yet, not the dramatic table flipping moment you imagine when you've spent years being dismissed. No, this was the moment that required precision, because I understood something my family didn't. The solution to their crisis wasn't dramatic, it was technical, and it was sitting in a filing system that nobody had taken seriously, because the person who built it had never been taken seriously. I started working. I called in favors from 2 of my consulting clients, one a former bank compliance officer, one a forensic accountant I'd referred business to for years. I pulled everything I could access remotely from the company's old vendor records, which I still had login credentials for, because nobody had ever thought to revoke them from the useless. Son. Within 48 hours, I had found 3 things. 1. The account mingling had a paper trail that, read correctly, actually protected Garrett from the fraud interpretation. It was sloppy, not criminal. 2. There was a dormant insurance clause in an 8-year-old vendor contract that covered up to those in losses from a primary contractor's insolvency. Nobody had read that contract in years. I'd flagged it in a memo 3 years ago, the memo my father used as a coaster. 3. The creditor who had filed. Their own paperwork had a procedural defect. They'd filed under the wrong business classification. The whole thing could be contested and likely dismissed if someone caught it within the filing window. That window closed in 11 days. I stared at my screen at 2 a.m. and thought about what to do next. I could walk back into that living room, drop 3 documents on the table, and watch their faces change, but that would make it about me, about the moment, about the satisfaction, and what I wanted was something cleaner, something they'd have to sit with long after I left the room. I called my mother, not my father, not Garrett, my mother, who had laughed at that Christmas dinner table, but who I also knew was the person who quietly held every piece of that family together when nobody was looking. Mum, I said, I need you to do something for me. Get Dad and Garrett together Sunday morning. Tell them to bring every document they have, and tell them to actually listen this time, not manage me. Listen. There was a long pause. Daniel, do you know something? Sunday morning, Mom. I spent Saturday building the briefing. 3 clean documents, color, coded executive summary on page 1, so even Garrett could follow it without getting lost. Sunday morning, I sat at that same table, and for the first time in my life, I talked, and the room was silent. I walked them through the insurance clause. I watched my father's face go from polite patience to rigid attention, to something I had never seen there before when looking at me. Disbelief. I laid out the creditor's filing defect and the 11-day window, now down to 4 days. I gave them the name of a litigation attorney I'd already contacted on their behalf, who was expecting their call Monday morning. I explained what the forensic accountant had found about Garrett's account, and how, structured correctly in a written response to the comptroller, it was defensible. Not ideal, but defensible. I slid the final document across the table. Nobody spoke. Garrett picked it up, read it, set it down. My father looked at me, and this is the moment I had carried in my chest for 31 years. And I want you to understand how it actually felt. My father looked at me and said quietly, "How long have you known how to do this?" I didn't say since you put me in the filing room. I didn't say since you used my memo as a coaster. I didn't say any of the things I had rehearsed in my head across 2 decades of Christmas dinners and dismissals and being introduced last at family events. I just said, "Long enough." And I stood up, put on my coat, and walked to the door. My mother caught my arm. Her eyes were wet. "Daniel, the attorney's name is on page 3, I said. "Call him Monday." And I left. The business survived. The creditor's case was dismissed. Insurance clause paid out $40,000, enough to stabilize. Garrett kept his job. My father kept his legacy. They never fully acknowledged it, not in the way you see in the movies. No tearful apology over a kitchen table. No sit down where my father told me had been wrong. But the next Christmas, my father introduced me to his business partner. "This is my son, Daniel," he said. He paused. "He's the one who saved the company." That was enough. That was everything. Some men fight to be seen. Some beg for it. I just kept working. And one day the work spoke for itself. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever been the one in the room that nobody really sees, then you already know what Daniel knew. The quiet ones aren't waiting. Who they could building. Though hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. And if you know someone who's been underestimated, someone still in their filing room, why send this to them. They need to hear it.